D.H. Lawrence had met Frida in Nottingham when she was the wife of a university professor. They'd fallen in love, married, and started on the restless traveling that lasted till Lawrence's death in 1930. In September 1922, they came to New Mexico in the southwest United States. The moment I saw the brilliant, proud morning sun shine high up over the deserts of Santa Fe, something stood still in my soul, and I started to attend. Lawrence wrote that this was the greatest experience from the outside world that I have ever had. Much of his time between 1922 and 1925 was spent in or near the little town of Taos. He didn't die there, but his ashes are in the mountains there. And there he's remembered, first as a man, then as a writer.
When he came to America in the first place, in response to an invitation from Mabel Dodge Lujan, who was a patroness of the arts of sorts, who ended up in Taos after a very vivid career in New York and Florence. And she had read Lawrence's Sea in Sardinia and thought that he was the proper person to write about New Mexico. She loved the country of New Mexico very much. As a matter of fact, I think she came there to teach the Indians their old handicrafts. And this was her point of entry into the Taos place, and she was sort of a member of this international colony of artists and things.
Since the turn of the century, Taos had become a haven for artists. The Santa Fe Railroad never came here, so it never grew very big. In Lawrence's time, as now, it had a mixed population of Spanish-American farmers, Pueblo Indians, and American artists and art collectors. In 1922, a rich, much-married American woman reigned over this mixed community. She offered Lawrence lodging, scenery, the Indians, and herself. Her name was Mabel Lujan.
Mabel was a very warm, perceptive woman. She had gone through the gamut of life in the United States, in the metropolitan center. She had been in all through Europe, and she was fed up with the values of this extroverted materialism of the Western world.
Overlooked by the sacred mountain, the Indian reservation lies just outside Taos Township. Mabel acquired land right on the edge of the reservation and built a fine adobe house there. Here she was close to her beloved Indians and could initiate into their mysteries the painters and writers and actors for whom she kept open house. She filled her home with live doves and unalive cockerels, artifacts collected from the old world and the new. For a while, the Lawrences became part of this Mabletown collection and endured her patronage.
Mabel was a very intelligent woman, very intelligent, very bossy, very determined, but extremely generous. Very, very attractive woman. Very attractive. And extremely generous. Generous to all kinds of people. And she married Tony. And Tony was a very, very tall, dignified Indian. A very remarkable man. And just what she needed. You just couldn't budge him. She couldn't boss him.
I think the thing that attracted her to Tony, to Taos, and to these Indians was that she believed that she had found values that were outside and probably superseding this materialistic world. So her whole memoirs amounted to a very honest expose of her experiences in the world she had left behind. She was chiefly concerned with these mystical, or we might say the Jungian values in Indian life, which is why she wanted Lawrence to come.
The parties Mabel gave were famous. She got Tony's friends to play and dance for him, and the guests joined in the round dance and the friendship dance just as they were danced at the Pueblo. Lawrence did take to the Indians, though not in Mabel's way. In a letter to the New York Times, Lawrence campaigned against the Bursum Bill, which was designed to carve up the Pueblo land and divide it among Anglos and Spanish-American squatters. While taking a side swipe at people like Mabel, those white highbrows, Lawrence wrote, these pale faces who love the dear Indian, the poor Indian, who would like to see all America restored to him, Lawrence yet wanted the Indians left alone. The Indians keep burning an eternal fire, the sacred fire of the old dark religion. Let us have the grace and dignity to shelter these ancient centers of life, so that if die they must, they die a natural death. It was this theme of the old religion that Lawrence enlarged on in The Plumed Serpent.
I'm a great admirer of Lawrence's work in Mexico, but in his book, The Plumed Serpent, all that he knew of Indians in Mexico for this quite wonderful descriptive book were all transplanted from Taos Pueblo to Mexico. He did not know the real meaning of the Aztec or the Toltec myth of Quetzalcoatl, but he had transplanted bodily from New Mexico, Taos Pueblo. The Indians were always the Red Indians of the North, as he called them, which were simply his friends, Trinidad and so on, the people here at Taos Pueblo. The woman who rode away laid in the Sierra Madres of Chihuahua with this wonderful cave, and the sacrifice of the woman was simply the cave right here in back of my own back pasture, the cave here, transplanted to Mexico.
She thought Lawrence should write about the New Mexican landscape, which he did, not precisely as she might have expected. He did The Woman Who Rode Away, St. Maur, The Princess, novellas, and some short stories and essays, and poetry, but he never managed a complete novel about it.
They did start a book together, a very beautiful book about Mabel's life. They were to collaborate, but of course Lawrence did all the writing. But very quickly, and as a matter of fact, the book lasted only 20 pages, and then Lawrence had his insight into Mabel, and they began to quarrel.
In the manuscript, Lawrence described Mabel thus. She was a sturdy woman with a round face, like an obstinate girl of 14. So childlike, yet a woman approaching 40. So naive-looking, softly full and feminine.
She was a headhunter, really, I think. She liked to surround herself with artists, with writers. And in Lawrence's case, she wanted to be an inspiration to him, and this was a source of conflict between her and Frida, for example.
Mabel wrote that when she first saw Lawrence, the womb in me roused to reach out and take him. One day she told Frida that she didn't think Frida was the right woman for Lawrence. Frida replied, "Try it then yourself, living with a genius. See what it's like and how easy it is."
Frida was jealous. Frida saw that the whole relationship was upsetting Lawrence.
Oh, yes, I love you, honey. I don't care if you're married 60 times. I'll get to you.
Oh, he was certainly interested in Mabel and fond of her in a way, but he found her very difficult she was too possessive, always wanted to manage everybody's life. So, of course, he rebelled violently against that. And he was certainly abetted by Frida because she was kind of jealous. I mean, she realized that Mabel was kind of in love with him in a way, you see. I mean, it wasn't that there was any affair there at all. and she was still certainly very fond of Tony, but she was fascinated by Lawrence and sort of wanted him, as one of her lions, more than as a lover, I'm sure. So he didn't want that. He didn't want to be possessed like that, you see.
Mabel realized very quickly that she had lost Lawrence, and she didn't quite know why. I think she lost him because she tried to impose her will on Lawrence. She tried to tell Lawrence how to write. She thought she would know. She thought she knew better about the way his life should take. The break between Lawrence and Mabel was rather ugly, and there was recrimination, letters back and forth, and they told each other what they thought of each other.
In one such letter, Lawrence described Mabel as a culture carrier, likes to play the patroness, hates the white world and loves the Indian out of hate. Is very generous, wants to be good, and is very wicked. Has a terrible will to power. She wants to be a witch and at the same time a Mary of Bethany at Jesus' feet.
Mabel was not a large enough person to realize that she hadn't as deep a place in Lawrence's life as she would have liked to. So instead of retaining him as a friend, she had a terrific ego. She cut him off completely. And in cutting him off, of course, she lost him forever. But not before they had voiced their angers, and it was a very, very ugly parting. Lawrence continued to try to be friends with Mabel because he didn't believe in angers. He said angers were our other self. Angers were not our real selves. And he wanted to continue as a friend of Mabel. But Mabel would have none of it. Her pride was so great that she said, I cut him off, I threw him away.
And we got to Taos, and he didn't like living in Taos, and he came up here and stayed here that winter, right here in this cabin. It was empty, and Rachel and I were living in the big house. Rachel didn't like him, but I liked him. He described parts of the world, so I sure could see them plainly. He'd been all over. He'd talk and he'd describe countries, and we'd go on picnics together, and I enjoyed him.
But we planned at that time this trip to Mexico. They had wanted to go later, and Bitter and I had planned to go too, so we planned to go together. And we left in April, I guess, and spent all spring and summer there. So he started to write The Plumed Serpent in Mexico that first winter that we were there together, and the first few chapters are almost exactly, just photographic of what we were doing, except he left himself out. Frida is Kate, and Vinner he called Owen, and I was called Villiers. And we went to our first bull flight together. And that whole description is verbatim what happened.
The bull, giving a little bound like a dog, ducked its head and dived its horns upwards into the horse's belly, rolling him over with his rider as one might push over a hat stand.
Except that, as I say, he left himself out. He put his own feelings and thoughts in Frida's mouth. I was very much amused with these few chapters in which he pictured me. It wasn't very flattering, and yet I didn't have any feeling of that it was unfair. In fact, it was rather accurate in a way, but I didn't feel it personally. And we had very nice times together. I was typing those first chapters of The Plumed Serpent as he was writing them.
Frida left America for Europe, drawn by her children. Lawrence followed after some months. There he resumed his friendship with the daughter of the Viscount Esher, the Honorable Dorothy Brett, a shy, deaf painter.
I met him in Hampstead, when he had a little house in Hampstead. in 1914, just when the war had started. I was scared. I was scared of those people, but anyhow, I went there to tea. It was a tiny little house, tiny. It seemed incredible that Frida could get into it even. She was huge. But we had tea there, and that started the whole thing. He sort of took me under his wing. Oh, we just clicked. Immediately. We sat on a little bench in front of the fire, and we had a wonderful time. I think he had a great feeling of protection for me. I don't quite know how to explain that.
Brett came back to the United States with Frida and Lawrence the second time they came, and of course, I suppose you'd say that she came as a sort of a member of Lawrence's run and them, his little colony that he always wanted to found for a group of choice friends.
You know, one of those idealistic colonies up at the ranch here. But of course it failed. It would have failed anyhow. You know, those things always do. They never succeed.
Within watching distance of her tower, Mabel set up the Lawrences in a pretty house. Admitting guilt, she made some kind of a peace with them. Lawrence left his phoenix symbol on a door there, another handiwork. Lawrence was the old Adam, but now with Brett there were two Eves too many. Once more the situation had become intolerable. The Lawrences had to put a distance between themselves and Mabel.
Lawrence said he was going, and of course she didn't want him to go completely. So then Mabel offered them the ranch, and we went up there.
Lawrence refused to be beholden to anybody, so he gave her the manuscript of Sons and Lovers and payment for it. But this ranch, I think, was a place that he loved. There's a wonderful picture of the ranch at the end of St. Maur, where Lou Witt brings the stallion finally to this ranch. And somehow the country, the horse perhaps, the country supplies the answer which in other stories that Lawrence wrote is supplied by his dark character, so to speak. This woman didn't find her destiny in a man. She found it in the country.
Lawrence described the ranch in letters. About 150 acres in the mountain foot slopes, mostly pine trees, but two clearings. Not much water, though. It's a lonely spot here. Beautiful scenery. Altitude 8,500 feet. We have two little log houses and a tiny cabin. We've been a month working, building up one house which was falling down and shingling the others. We had 4 Indians working on the job.
He bought it, the place, and he told me to have to take him out to work. From there, I stayed about 15 years. And to work with Frida, to build it, the house is kind of ruined already. Then we have to fix him up inside. We have to make a cupboard and everything. And after that, my wife, they went out. We stay with him all the time.
Brett had the tiny cabin only a glance away from the 3-roomed ranch house where Lawrence and Frida lived. She joined in the work like a man. Only Frida was idle. Even visitors worked.
We spent a great deal of time in the house in the evenings when it was cold, sitting around the fireplace, and Lawrence liked to act and imitate. And then when he stopped acting, why, he would sit in a rocking chair and fold his hands and rock back and forth as though his little act was over.
I remember one time I did tell him I'd just been reading one of his stories in which he began with an almost exact description of himself and Frida in one of their conversations or one situation in a certain place. And then the story would gradually get away from that realistic point of view, the exact description of something that actually happened, and gradually build these two characters into somebody else, which I suppose is all right to someone who doesn't know him, but the person who knew the people, knew him and knew Frida and knew the situation, it's very upsetting to have it begin in a factual way and then suddenly branch off into fiction and to build up the characters in a completely different way from these original people he had. The woman who rode away was really Mabel, vaguely, but not specifically, not really. Just as some of the characters, I think in Seymour, one of the characters is Brat, and yet it isn't an exact picture at all. He just used people always as a sort of a springboard in his characters to go on to the delineation of quite a different character, but which he started with a real person. He did that a great deal.
For Lawrence, it was a period of complete living. He made and baked bread for Frida, Brett, and himself in the adobe oven. He tended the animals of the ranch, who took on personalities of their own.
We had the horses. I had a very nice horse, a red sorrel. And Lawrence had a rather inferior horse called Aaron, a black one. And Frida had a great big gray horse.
Lawrence was very wonderful when he rode a horse because he always wanted to be ahead. But he was also very awkward on a horse. As Frida said, there you have him at his best and at his worst.
Lawrence never thought a woman could really do anything, you know. So whenever I painted, he had to paint two on the same painting because he didn't feel somehow that a woman could achieve anything because she was just female. That we all painted on because, he had to paint on that. I had done the original painting, you see. I had got it all going. And then he had to paint over it, you see. He had to make an improvement on himself and an improvement on Frida, on the horses and everything. And Frida painted the white chickens. That was the only thing she was allowed to paint. And he painted the porcupine and so on. Despite their quarrels, in August of 1924, Mabel and Tony and Frida and Lawrence took Mabel's Model T Ford and headed off into the desert. They were bound for Arizona to see the Hopi Indian snake dance. Lawrence used this trip as the basis for an essay in which he contrasted the white man's God with that of the Indians. We have undertaken the scientific conquest of forces, of natural conditions. It has been comparatively easy, and we are victors. We are little gods are gods of the machine only. Our cosmos is a great engine. The Hopi sought the conquest by means of the mystic living will that is in man, pitted against the living will of the dragon cosmos. We dam the Nile and take the railway across America. The Hopi smooths the rattlesnake and carries him in his mouth to send him back into the dark places of the earth, an emissary to the inner powers. The white Americans hurry back to their motor cars, and soon the air buzzes with starting engines like the biggest of rattlesnakes buzzing.
He was so high-strung that little things would he would just explode over them, you see, and say terrible things to Frida, which was very embarrassing indeed to people who were there, who weren't particularly involved in whatever it was that was going on, and just to have him suddenly turn on Frida and say these revolting things, or break the tea set, or things like that, violent. You just didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, because you weren't involved.
Well, I remember how he and Frida fought. When they moved up there at the ranch, they would ride horseback down here to get milk. And sometimes we'd hear them several minutes before they got here. They're yelling at each other.
One day we were all riding down the trail, and Frida was sort of carelessly not paying much attention to what she was doing, enjoying herself. And the big white horse, Azul, that she wore, suddenly shied at something on the trail, threw her off. And she came tumbling down, which was quite a fall. I mean, she was a big woman. And, but she wasn't hurt. But Lawrence was very much upset by this, And because he was very high-strung and nervous and everything. So afterwards, when we were all back at the ranch, and Frida was stimulated by it, the fact that something like that had happened, kind of violent, and yet nothing had happened. She felt perfectly all right. And she was very exuberantly going over this story of how clever she'd been to fall easily and not been hurt and so forth. And quite inexplicably, he simply turned on her and began to attack her and say what a bitch she was, and that immediately she had another male companion, that she sat there with her legs spraddled and playing up to him and so forth, which had nothing whatever to do with what was going on, we felt. And Frida was very much annoyed and turned indignantly and said, "Why, it's not so, it's not so. Spoodle, tell him it isn't so. How ridiculous." And then, of course, as soon as the outburst was over, life went on just as though nothing had happened. I mean, he went on cooking and was very sweet and gentle, but these sudden outbursts he had to get it off his chest, apparently.
Frida and Lawrence quarreled and quarreled and quarreled. These quarrels were misunderstood because they were the result of Lawrence's anguish with creation.
He said that with Frida, he knew what he had. And if he left her and got another woman, he wouldn't know what he was getting. Right he was. So he stayed with her. Also a kind of moral thing, that English Midland moral thing. They have that rather rigid kind of morality. And he had a great deal of that. A great deal of it. He was here for the summer. And then that winter, we went to Old Mexico. And you know, in Old Mexico, they were frightened of him. If we went to little remote villages, or walked out of Oaxaca, or drove out, and then walked into a little village, the people were afraid of him. They would run away and hide. They were afraid of the red. They would call Christos, and they would run away and hide. Lawrence, of course, was furious, upset by it.
In Oaxaca, almost 2 or 3 weeks before Lawrence almost died, the Brett and Lawrence used to go out into the country and paint. Frida resented that. She became violently jealous, and she demanded that the Brett leave.
So I came back ahead of them. Then he was terribly sick. I think he got something. Some of these Mexican soldiers would come up from the interior with fearful diseases. And he caught a very bad form of malaria. He was terribly sick.
From Mexico, Lawrence wrote to Brett, "Friendship between a man and a woman as a thing of first importance to either is impossible. And between you and me, there is no sensual correspondence."
Even though Frida contradicted almost everything that Lawrence said, Frida was the great thing in Lawrence's life. It's when he was dying in Oaxaca, he said, "You and only you are the only thing that has counted."
He came back. He was absolutely pale green. I've never seen such a color. And when he was to get across the border, you know, they have these doctors. You have to go through not only the customs, but a doctor to get into this country. And he rouged his face. Got through it like that. But you've no idea what this climate did for him. It was remarkable, his recovery when he got back from Old Mexico. 1 month he was riding, and yet he couldn't stay.
She stayed with him a while, but as always, when there's a third person around, she and Frida sometimes had a difference of opinion. I think not in the ordinary sense of one woman being jealous of another one at all. I think it was more a case of somebody being underfoot all the time.
Brett adored Lawrence. I mean, she just hung on every word he had and wanted to be with him all the time. And, of course, that was another thing that Frida got jealous. She was just annoyed with. I mean, it wasn't that they were having an affair either. It was not that kind of thing. But just to have this other woman around all the time was extremely annoying to Frida.
At that time, I was down below on the Hawk Ranch because Frida had got, just like women get, she just didn't want me around.
The Brett was required to live below and was allowed to come up to the ranch only 3 days a week. And before she came across the clearing, she must blow her whistle. If she came on the wrong day, Frida was enraged. The Brett, of course, was sort of on the outskirts of the friendship because Frida would have it no other way. Frida could not bear the Brett, and of course Brett, this very day, doesn't like Frida. I don't know whether this was just two women fighting over Lawrence or not, but the antagonism remains in the Brett.
Well, he said he'd never in his life go to a lonely place and be alone with Frida. He was so bored. Utterly bored. Because that's one of the reasons he brought me over, was to break that intense boredom. She was a very boring woman. She was one of these great, big, motherly people, but boring. And terribly jealous and terribly bossy. If he had stayed here, I think he would be alive now. But they can't stay put, those people. TB people, so they never can. They're always looking for the perfect spot, and they never will stay in the perfect spot when they find it. I don't know what it is. They wander and wander and wander.
In September 1925, Lawrence left New Mexico for the last time, and in a few weeks was in Italy, staying in a villa rented from Angelina Ravagli, whom Frida was to marry 25 years later in Taos.
And Frida would always have the glad eye, you see. Started this kind of business. He came over to Capri. He had a terrible row with Frida and her two daughters who tormented him. I had gone to Capri because he had friends there, and he wanted me to see Italy. He said everybody should see Italy. He loved Italy.
She painted a portrait of Lawrence in Capri. She told me once that she started this portrait during their time in Capri, and that people made so much fun of it, she destroyed it. And she has only recently done this painting again. This was a portrait of Lawrence in two guises, one as Pan and one as Christ, each, of course, with Lawrence's face, facing each other across a field of flowers. It's very, very amusing.
Oh, he was so sick. He was just a wisp and pale green again. And he stayed with friends. And then I had to go back to England because of my citizenship. And I had to come back to this country to get it, you see. I came down here and I stayed with Mabel's, and then in the summer I went to look after the ranch. They were always coming back, always. Then when he wanted to come back, Frida didn't, and when Frida wanted to come back, he didn't, and then he left it too late. He went to Vence, and he was too sick. And I went to New York, and I was in the Shelton Hotel, and I got a telegram from Frida saying, come over. Lawrence very sick. Come over and make him well as you did before. He was dead before I got the telegram. Even so, it would have been hopeless. It just went out, And he just faded out.
And the pine trees make little noises, sudden and stealthy, as if they were walking about. And the place heaves with ghosts. That place, the ranch, heaves with ghosts. But when one has got used to one's own home ghosts, be they never so many and so potent, they are like one's own family, but nearer than the blood. It is the ghosts one misses most, the ghosts here of the Rocky Mountains, that never go beyond the timber and that linger like the animals round the water spring. I know them, they know me. We go well together. They reproach me for going away. They're resentful, too.
He liked Taos, not the village of Taos, but he liked the country. And I think if he had been well toward the end of his life, that he probably would have come back and lived here. Frida did, you know. She came back about let's see, what would it have been? Probably around 1935 or 6, I think. And she lived there until she died in 1956. So she certainly liked it. He found the country very, he found it compatible somehow. Brett adapted herself to Taos very easily, apparently, and I think she's been there ever since, except for a few odd visits to England now and then. She's become a member of the colony, and she paints pictures of Indians, the sort of thing that Lawrence wrote about.
Mabel was still in Taos, and for a time there was a general truce.
We all three got along. That's what nobody could understand. Mabel and Frida and I got along perfectly. Perfectly. Isn't that ridiculous?
But the three women had not forgotten Lawrence, buried in Vence in the south of France. So the sleeping phoenix was dug up and burned to ashes in accordance with his destiny. And the three women's struggle for possession of him went on.
It was thought he wanted to be brought over to here, to the ranch, and have his ashes scattered, you see. So when Frida came, he was cremated, and his ashes put in an urn, and Frida and Angie brought them over. But by some strange error, they forgot them in New York. And there they were, lost in New York. Where were Lawrence's ashes? Well, Stieglitz, that is Georgia O'Keeffe's husband, was alive then. And he found the ashes. I think they had been left somehow, either in a hotel or in his gallery. I'm not quite sure which. So the ashes were recovered, and then they brought them down here. And when they got here, they again left them in Tinker's.
And then we got the news that Angelina was coming from Europe, and we went to meet him at the station, and he gave me a little bit of a box, just like child's caution, and said, "This is Lawrence, and you take care of him. I have other things to do." So we came home, and my friends all wanted me to come back to Taos because they didn't like the idea of my staying with them too there in the house. So they said, "We would come for you and drive you back to Taos." And when they came, Angelina said, and Frida too, "Why don't you take the ashes with you? Because we have so much other luggage." They had a little convertible car. When they left in the car, they forgot the ashes in my house yet. And I didn't know how to get Frida. So I went even to the newspaper office and asked the man there. I knew the editor, Spud Johnson. Oh, he said, "Never mind. Just, do you mind leaving Lawrence with you?" I said, "No, I don't." So then he said, "All right, keep it until they come back."
And when they got up to the ranch, no ashes. They'd lost the ashes again. But Tinker had got them in her house, Tinker Fashion. And she had made a little shrine for them. She put a couple of candles in front of it. And she kept them until she could get word to them that she had them.
But when finally they did come back, Frida said, "You know, I remembered it halfway to the ranch, but I thought Lawrence wouldn't mind to stay with Tinker, so let him stay with Tinker for a while, because the chapel wasn't ready either."
Then they were brought up to the ranch, and instead of scattering them, Angie built that little cold stone chapel in which to have them put, which of course he would hate if he ever saw it. Loathed. He made a curious, rather fascinating little dove that was on the top of it. Little bird, little phoenix, as a matter of fact, which has been now replaced by a very handsome phoenix with a great big large bosom. Have you seen it?
It was quite a ceremony to when they put the ashes into the place in the chapel. I think there were about 85 people from all over, his friends from Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And Indians made a big bonfire and sang something. And then there was an actress here, Shakespearean actress. She read his last poems, which is all, who was very, very nice.
Oh, then there was a plot hatched. I won't mention the people in it, at least not all of them, but Mabel was in it, and Mabel and a few others were to steal the ashes out of the chapel and scatter them. Frida got hold of this story, and all the blame was put on me. All the rest of the people simply disappeared and pretended they knew nothing about it and left it all on me. And she wouldn't speak to me for a whole year or more. She was furious. They're still there. They're still there in that miserable little place. Frida is there outside. He is in the chapel, and she's just outside, which seems to me ironical and somehow rather just. There she is in that large grave with that ornate stone over her. Oh, dear.